Hi, everyone. It's a big pleasure for me to introduce Fernanda Viégas and Martin Wattenberg. Fernanda and Martin are internationally recognized researchers on visualization aiming at consumers and mass audience, contributing substantially to social and collaborative visualization. They are principal scientists at Google, where they co-lead the People Plus AI Research Initiative, part of the Google Brain. Fernando and Martin are also starting a new position as Google McKay Professor at Computer Science at Harvard, and they are looking for motivated and highly skilled PhD students. They are founders of the well-known Many Eyes website, which seeks to make visualization accessible to the public. Their work in machine learning focuses on transparency and interpretability as part of a broad agenda to improve human-AI interaction. They are also known for using academic techniques to create visualization-based artwork, which has been exhibited in important venues such as the Museum of Modern Art in New York, London Institute of Contemporary Arts, and the Whitney Museum of American Arts. Fernando and Martin, thank you very much once again for accepting our invitation, and now the word is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us. We are so excited. This is such a big honor for us because this is obviously one of our favorite conferences. So it was, we were really excited when we got the invitation. All right, so today we're going to talk about when experience fails, things that work when they shouldn't. And so we're going to take a look at some of our past work. In fact, we're not going to talk as much about some of our most recent work with machine learning. We're going to take a long look to the past, and we're going to be covering both projects that we've done, but also some of the projects from other folks that whose work we admire. And so part of the question is, why do we want to look at these happy surprises, right? Part of the reason is because they can help improve our mental models for what works and what doesn't work. Even in a discipline like data visualization, where we have a lot of heuristics and rules, should we revisit maybe some of those? And also trying to redefine some of the goals and why, what are some goals that are worthwhile? And I'll also say that it's nice to remind ourselves, especially in a cynical age like ours, that visualization can still be incredibly beautiful and useful. And I'm going to leave you with actually a user quote that we got from one of our data visualization user studies. And someone said, data visualizations, they look like art and make you look twice. Then all of a sudden, you are reading, thinking, feeling good, learning. So keep that. That is the spirit of this talk today.
Okay. So next slide. What if we told you about a visualization that worked like this? Most of the visual attributes were just random. There was exactly one visual encoding that actually related to the data. And worse yet, a whole lot of users didn't even understand that one encoding. That would sound impossible and terrible, right? Okay, next slide. What are we talking about? We are talking about word clouds. And in fact, a lot of people really dislike word clouds. It is not hard to find people who, look at them and, next slide, feel real personal pain at the fact that it is easy to make them work. Now, in this case, what is this particular person talking about? They're talking about a site, a late lamented site called Wordle. Next slide. What is the source of their pain with word clouds? So this Wordle was a site. It existed for, I think, about 8 years. And it was an online site where you could go and you could paste in text. People would paste in their blogs. They would paste in wedding invitations. Created by Jonathan Feinberg, an incredibly talented engineer, not a visualization researcher. And it would create things like the image you see on the right here. And actually looking at that, it's a little bit hard to see why people would be so mad at something that actually looks very innocuous and pretty. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about how it worked. This is another example of a Wordle. And the thing about it is it really is a very simple visualization in the sense that it just maps font size to the word count in a given text. Next slide. So why shouldn't it work? Well, this is the funny thing. If you sit and sort of try to think about why these tag clouds and word clouds like this, why they're bad, it's actually very, very easy to come up with reasons. Where do you look first? It's all a big jumble. The long words get more weight than short words, which clearly is just completely unjustified. You can look through this list and you will find all sorts of reasons to be highly suspicious. And in fact, I would leave as an exercise for the listener to expand the list that you see here. Next slide. We don't have time for that. And yet, next slide. When we looked at what happened in practice with Wordle, what we found is that a variety of users, and both very sophisticated journalists and lay users, would do incredibly interesting things with it, would find it very useful. We would see newspapers that would create subtle word clouds analyzing political speeches. Next slide. In fact, you can this will take you back to a different era because you'll see how many different media sites would sit here and do real political analysis with this. Next slide. But it wasn't just that. The way Wordle was designed, it was very easy to take what you had made and then print it in various ways. You could keep it as a PDF. And so people did all sorts of things that were not just pure visualizations, but in this case, for example, party invitations. Okay, so the common attitudes, that's very interesting. Among the visualization world, it was pretty negative, frankly. This was just a random sample I found doing a recent Google search, and it wasn't hard. I could have found many, many more headlines like this. But I want to talk about a different attitude. Next slide. And I want to talk about a couple of articles by Marty Hurst, who is someone I greatly respect. And looking at these articles with the benefit of time, so there's one from 2008, and there's one more recently. I think these titles alone tell the story. I think this is a really good attitude. Next slide. I think when you read these articles, I encourage you to read this 2008 article because it holds up very well in a lot of ways. So here's some quotes. So, Marty looked at this and, the author admits he's very puzzled by these tag clouds. There's obviously better ways to show the data, and yet they are all over. And the important reaction here is trying to understand why. And I think that's the attitude we should have with this type of visualization. So next slide. And what she found is she got two conclusions. One is she was pointing out, look, there is a social dimension to tag clouds that is deeply important to this. And there's another conclusion she made. And again, I'm oversimplifying a fairly nuanced set of conclusions, which is that creators and users are okay with imprecision, which is a little bit heretical in the visualization world, but I think an important point. Next slide. Now, we did our own study of Wordle because and we ended up being very interested in this as well. And one thing we discovered, it sort of telegraphed this earlier, many people we surveyed, and we were surveying people who were on the site willing to fill out a survey. So if anything, we were getting the most knowledgeable users of Wordle. They did not understand what the font size meant. So they literally didn't get what was being shown. They still liked it. On the other hand, the good was, and this is where our user quote comes from, it was causing people to stop and think about the text in new ways. It also turned out for many people, having any way to visualize text was better than nothing. And finally, the whole authoring aspect of Wordle let people feel creative in a very beneficial, I think, sort of equalizing way. It gave them tools to look at their own data. Next slide. Okay, so what are the lessons here? I think one important lesson is that approximations are better than nothing. I think a focus on precision can often lead us astray. And a second issue is that there is a lot more to visualization than transferring data from a database into someone's head.
Okay, so to keep on maybe with this theme of approximations, let's talk about our second case study here. What if we told you about a visualization that was like a tag cloud, but for something with less meaning than words? And something that looked at images by counting pixels only. No fancy machine learning. This is not pixel counting from ML. What would you think about such a thing? heretical, right? But this is actually a project we did called Flicker Flow. And this is the context for this project. We were approached a number of years ago. We were approached by a magazine called Boston Magazine, and they asked us, "Can you visualize the city of Boston?" And it's a print magazine. It's not online. It's not interactive. So we kept thinking, what does it mean to visualize a city? And so we started thinking more about this and decided, one of the things that is kind of expressive about Boston is the seasonality. The fact that it is as if the city cloaked itself in different colors as the year progresses, right? So the question for us was, how can we capture that change through a visualization? So we went to Flickr, which is a website where people can post photos that they take. And we decided to look for all the pictures about the Boston Common. Boston Common is the largest public park in Boston. It's kind of the central park of Boston, if you will. And on Flickr, there are a number of photos that people post publicly that are under Creative Commons license. And so we downloaded a year's worth of photos of the Boston Common, and we binned these pictures by month. So these are all the pictures for January, these are all the pictures for June, and so forth, okay? And now that we had the pictures, what we did is we kind of only paid attention to the colors in the picture. It is as if we had squeezed those pictures and just were left with colors. And basically, we were counting pixels. Imagine you have, this color space, this cube that is this color space, and we're literally looking at each one of the tiny cubes for each one of the hues. And all we're doing is counting pixels, and we're enlarging cubes of the colors we see the most, and decreasing the size of cubes of the colors we see the least, okay? Now, remember, we have these per month of the year, right? And so we just started to stack them on top of each other over a whole year. And because weather and, the seasons are a cyclical rhythm, we decided to put this in a circle. And so this is what the visualization ended up looking like. This is Flickr Flow. And to our surprise, even though we were taking out a ton of information we were taking out most of the content from these images, right? We were literally just counting colors. You could still see information here. So for instance, you will notice that January is at the very bottom of this circle. And that's when, winter is happening in Boston, obviously. And so that's when we have a lot of whites and grays. If you keep going clockwise as the year is progressing, you will see in May, you have a nice ribbon of fuchsia, and that represents a lot of the flowers that are starting to bloom in the park. And then in June, you have a bulge of greens, and those are the leaves coming out. And then, between October and November, you have a lot of earth tones, representative of the famous Boston foliage, right? Or New England foliage. And so it was interesting to see what we could do, even though we were doing away with so much of the information we had available to us. And in fact, even though this looks very flowy, right? If we were to cut these down to the peak of each season, if you will, you get to see that the color distribution is dramatically different between, say, fall and winter and summer and so forth. This is what the visualization ended up looking like on the magazine. As you can see, they did a couple of inserts just to explain to the reader that these colors were coming from actual photos of the park. And so, I think the main lesson we take from this was that we were taking a lot of chances here, but projecting a high dimensional space of images into low dimensional color space was surprisingly useful. We still got signal after we took away pretty much all of the content from that data collection.
Okay, so there you saw an example of a projection of where you took away almost all the data. Let's talk about another color scheme that is maybe even more ridiculous. Next slide. Okay, what if we told you about a visualization that used a color encoding for thousands of categorical items, and some of those items got mapped to the same color even though they're very different, and some very similar items got mapped to completely different colors? What then? Okay, next slide. Let's talk about the case of chromogram. Next slide. And this is the idea here. This is work done with Kate Hollenbach. And the goal was to look at repetitive activities, specifically edits on Wikipedia. And this was not like our history flow work where we're looking at a single page, but we're following a person across many, many different edits. Next slide. So the problem is that an editor, and the editors we were looking at were people who were doing tens of thousands of edits. They were admins often. And how could you see tens of thousands of those edits at once? So we tried a whole bunch of things. It was quite a dramatic project with many points where we thought nothing would work. But then we tried the following kind of strange mapping. Next slide. What we decided to do is look at the names of the articles being edited. And we would map those names onto colors. We would take the first letter and map it to hue, the second letter to brightness, the third letter to saturation. Had a weird little exception where if there were numbers, we would map it to grayscale. And we said, what then? Will this show us something? So this really shouldn't work. Next slide. Because if you think about it, there's absolutely no reason for it to work. Alphabetical order is kind of meaningless. Different words, there's no reason for similar words to be mapped to each other. It violates every convention we have, and rainbow color maps are a red flag at VIS. Okay, next slide. So I think the only way to show this is with a demo. So if we can move to the demo screen. Okay, here is the application we made. So what we're looking at here is a timeline of edits, okay? I'm scrolling through, and I'm scrolling through time here, and each little stripe is a thin rectangle that represents an edit on a page. Now on the right, you can see a list of the first words in those titles. It's not a tag cloud, by the way. Here we chose a bar chart. And if I move my mouse over, I can see what these are. Okay, this shows me some interesting stuff in terms of the rhythm, but where it really turns into something that's useful is when I go to block mode, okay? And now what I've done is I've packed all of these items together into a big compressed timeline, and I can see a huge number of edits at once. In this case, there's more than 11,000 edits on the screen. And when I do this, because of the color coding, suddenly I can see almost different chapters in this editor's life. I can say, all these grayscale things here, what are those? Oh, look, now they're doing all these books in different years, 1985 books, 1984 books, 1983 books. And over here, now they're into 1700s books, and you can see them chugging through a whole project. What about later? Here we can say, but after a while, they stopped doing that. And now there's this red stuff that comes up. What is that? Articles for deletion. And here you can see them chugging through. Now it's like in these months, in April and May, they decide they are going to do articles for deletion. There's more than just sort of segmenting behavior. There's some other things that come out here. One of the most interesting things is if you look down here, there's actually kind of a rainbow pattern where we see red to orange to green to blue to purple. And what we're seeing there is now we are seeing actually they're operating in alphabetical order. That's interesting. That's a pattern we did not expect to see at all. Let's look at a couple of other examples. Let us look at this user. And here we see a much more complicated pattern. We see interesting things where we'll see chunks of one uniform color, and there that seems to be they're looking at one North Carolina map. But then it'll be interspersed with little rainbows often. So here they're looking at an Alabama map, it looks like, and then suddenly all these cities in Alabama. Once again, they're back to the Alabama map and making edits, and then a whole bunch of cities. And we're seeing a very subtle kind of rhythm there. Let's look at one more example. Let's look at this user called Pearl. The data is taking a little while to load here. There we go. It took a while to load because there's more than 100,000 edits. Now this looks, I think, very different from the others. This just looks downright synthetic. And in fact, you can ask, how could any human make this many edits? And in fact, there's an interesting answer to that question. This is not a human. This is a bot written in the language Perl, so it's sort of a pun. And what you can see is the bot is just going through and doing minor category cleanup over and over again based on, as it chugs through. And once again, all these rainbows show a certain regularity of activity, in this case, that far exceeds any of the humans. Okay. All right, with that, let's go back to the video. And so we learned a huge amount from this. I think you saw that there was a lot in this. Next slide. And, in addition to the examples that I showed, here are just a few sort of chunks of things that we saw we saw somebody who was interested in US ships. We saw a lot of people looking at numerical titles. It was easy to see, people switching between different things. Copy edits show up very distinctively if you look at comments and so forth. Next slide. But I think the rainbows we noticed were especially interesting because there were really interesting effects. So one thing is it just clued us into a really kind of fascinating social phenomenon. A lot of people edit in alphabetical order, and investigating why this is, it turns out there are many sort of to-do lists on Wikipedia suggesting things that you should do. These are kind of crowdsourced, pure coordination activities. So it tells us about something about the sociology and coordination going on in Wikipedia that is non-obvious. There's something else that's kind of fascinating about this too. We had a hypothesis. We said, well, look, if people are going in alphabetical order, sometimes people are lazy. They might quit halfway through a project. And if so, you would expect that pages that were at the beginning of the alphabet would get more edits than ones at the end. And it turns out when you do a statistical analysis, that was exactly what we found. There are big differences between, a page starting with A and a page starting with Z. As someone whose name is at the end of the alphabet, I'm very sensitive to these things. And I was fascinated to discover this kind of glitch in the matrix. Next slide. So what are the lessons from this? Well, I think one lesson again is approximations are better than nothing. I mean, even as the authors of this visualization, I have to say, this mapping of colors is really weird and has all sorts of flaws. And frankly, even random colors probably would have told us some of this stuff, although not the alphabetical order. The second thing is, to put it this way, look, if you don't try a lot of things, you're going to miss stuff. This is I believe we submitted this paper to InfoVis and it got rejected. And even I think when it got accepted to another conference, the reviewers basically said something like, yeah, you were kind of lucky with this alphabetical order thing. That just happened to work. It's like, well, true, we were lucky. But, that was because we were probing the design space very heavily. Okay, next slide. All right. So that was, let's talk about another visualization. Let's talk about one that is going to kill every data to ink type ratio you can imagine. This is not one of ours. And this is something that has, basically 1,000 to 1 dots to data point ratio. It takes a long time to look at. And when it has labels, those labels are changing all the time. Next slide.
Hello. Oh, I think. Is Martin back?
Yeah. Okay, Fernanda, do you want to take it from here?
Yes, sure. Sounds good. So this is kind of a case study for a huge amount of visualization work and craft for basically 10 data points. And this comes to us from the New York Times, from a number of folks who authored this article. And so right now, let's take a look at this actual visualization in action. And so you can see these dots that are traveling from the left to the right, and each one of these dots represents one boy growing up in the US. The color of the dots has to do with race. So white boys, white men versus black men. White is this orangey yellowish color, and black men are represented by the blue color. And what the visualization is trying to show is that even though you're taking black and white boys that grew up in the same condition, they grew up rich, as they grow up, what happens with the distribution? Do they continue to be either rich or upper class, or do they descend in terms of social class? And you can see the disparity between the two races, right? You can see that many more yellow dots make it to continue it in the top, and whereas many more of the blue dots start falling down to become poor adults or lower middle class adults and so forth. You can see that the visualization is kind of ending its animation there, but there's another thing that's very important here, which is at the end of the visualization on the right, you can see kind of it's not a bar chart, but it's a aggregation, if you will, of the dots, of the distribution of the dots on each one of these different segments. And then you can really see as they aggregate how much more yellow there is at the top versus at the bottom, right? And how much more blue there is at the bottom. And you can play with this, you can replay. If you think about it, the data itself is not very complicated, but there is a lot that went into this animation. And part of the reason, so Adam Pierce, who is one of the authors of this article and this visualization, works with us and actually explained to us a lot of the thinking behind this and a lot of why they thought it was important to actually take the time to animate this, how hard it was to get this data in the first place, but how important it was to kind of hold the viewer's attention longer, to kind of let it sink, what the implications of what is happening here. So I'm going to go back now to the slides and talk just very briefly about these lessons learned, right? So efficiency, the ink to information ratio, is not the only value, or shouldn't be the only value you think about as a data visualization creator. And also pay attention to bugs. Oh yeah, I forgot to say that. The little, here, I can't even go back. These guys here, these bars that show the aggregation at the very end, which I thought was really important as a reader when I saw this article. It turns out that was a bug. Adam Pierce explained to us that was a bug and they didn't realize it was doing that. Then they decided to just leave it. To my mind, this is super important because at the end of this beautiful animation, that's how you see the end result of these disparities. And so pay attention to bugs, they might be features in disguise.
So I was going to say one more thing on this. An interesting thing about this is I feel like on that New York Times one, I feel like I would have been skeptical about it. I think Adam was not. So this shows that, some people have this great design intuition and you should pay attention to that. Okay, so next slide. That's yours.
So thanks, Martin. So now let's switch gears and let's talk about a data visualization that would function as a social network diagram for text. You may be scratching your head thinking, what did you just say? And not only that, but something that was based on words like the and, which for computer scientists are exactly the kind of stop word that you want to throw away because they don't help in any way, shape, or form, right? Well, what if you had a whole visualization that was based on these stop words? That's what we're going to share with you right now. This is going to take us back to 2007, 2009. As Gustavo very nicely mentioned in the introduction, we did some work called Many Eyes. It was a website where anyone could come, upload data, visualize, create interactive visualizations of data sets, and share it with the world. In fact, there were a number of interactive visualization techniques that you could use, and some of them were text-based data visualization techniques. And so what I want to talk about today is the PhraseNet, which was one of the techniques available on Many Eyes. And the way it works is that you, as the visualizer, you create a word sequence filter. So you imagine you have word 1 and word 2, and in the middle, you are going to decide what is the connecting word. So in this case, I'm choosing and. Remember those stop words, right? Word 1 and word 2. Then Many Eyes would find this sequence of words in this case, Jane Austen's novel. So if I had uploaded the Jane Austen novel Pride and Prejudice, Many Eyes would scan through the entire text and find all the instances where you have that kind of pattern. Okay, then it would turn those instances into edges in a graph, right? So where you would have, in this case, pride, arrow, impertinence. The arrow would be and, okay? And notice that we would color words differently, whether they were the word number 1 or word number 2. Okay, so what would this do? In the case of Pride and Prejudice, right now we're looking at the network for word and word, okay? So immediately I can see at the bottom right there that it surfaced to me the social network of the novel. Elizabeth and the father and mother, uncle, so forth. But not only that, so it's not only people who show up in this kind of clustering. We also have clusters about different aspects of the novel and different concepts. So for instance, we have pride and vanity and conceit and impertinence, so all the kind of not so good, the kind of negative concepts, and folly, and at the same time, on the other hand, on the other side, we have the more positive, if you will, concepts like affection and solicitude and wishes and hopes. If we change our connector, if we change our filter, and we do word at word, we immediately see kind of the collection of places where that the novel touches on. So, the large mentions, Netherfield and Longbourn and Pemberley. And then because we chose the connector at, we can zoom in and we can see what was happening at these different places. So, in Longbourn, people assembled there. They called at Longbourn. They were received at Longbourn, or they stopped there. So you can start to get a sense a little bit of some of the different kinds of actions that may be happening. A very different PhraseNet here. This is a visualization of the Bible, and the pattern we're looking for is X beget Y. So beget as in had a child, okay? So, and you can see what we're looking at here is kind of a family tree in the Bible. In fact, if I zoom in, you can start to actually read some of these names, and you can see that Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob, and so forth. And you can see the different kinds of families existent in the Bible. And then finally, also talking about the Bible with the pattern X of Y, right? And so we have at the top there the Old Testament, so King of Israel, children of Israel. And then at the bottom right here, we have the New Testament with phrases like Kingdom of God, Son of God, the Word of God, and so forth. So if there were a bad piece here, I guess the bad piece would be focus on these little connector words. Again, these are things that we are, as computer scientists, are usually, we throw them away, we disregard them. And here we were paying very close attention to them. The good part is that you still have meaning coming out, even though this is quite brittle, if you think about it, right? It's very, there's no machine learning anything here. It's a very specific pattern. Meaning still comes out. And again, anything is better than nothing.
Okay, all right. Next slide. Let's talk about another tip. This is, people in the visualization community hate this. There are mountains of scientific studies that are well-done studies that people cite against it, yet it continues to be used by practitioners. I'll give you two hints. One is on the slide. We're not talking about pie charts. The other hint is my bookshelf. Yes, we are talking about rainbow color scales. Next slide. Let's talk about the theory and practice here. So the theory is pretty clear historically. Rainbow color scales are people really dislike them. It's kind of funny. There's one article in which they are literally referring to the rainbow's color scale as the enemy. The practice, though, is also pretty clear. People keep using them. Like I was just doing a bunch of image searches to make this, and it was very easy to find examples of scientists, good scientists, using this kind of color scale. Next slide. So the funny thing is that even this fact that people keep using them despite the studies against them has become part of the lore. And people are like, what can we do? And here's one quote that says, we need to admonish people. It's not enough just to inform them that this is a bad idea. Okay, so next slide. What is the case? Like, why is it that people dislike these things? And in fact, there are a lot of really good reasons that are based on really excellent perceptual science. Now, people do often start with a sort of assumption that the low-level perceptual psychology of these things is going to map onto large-scale performance that we're interested in. But subject to that assumption, there's lots of stuff that goes wrong. Luminance is very weird in these things. There are many different named colors, and that can lead to illusions. If you look at this color scale here, you can see these sort of weird arbitrary points, like yellow just stands out. Like, why does that particular part of the scale stand out? So there's lots of reasons, and accessibility is, last but not least here, that one should be suspicious at the very least. And this has contributed to this belief that these things have got to go. Yeah, next slide. There's also kind of an anecdotal case in favor of rainbow color scales. And just talking about, my own experience here, I have many times ended up with rainbow color scales, even after trying alternatives. There's this really excellent paper by Liu and Hare where they were investigating sort of perceptual effects of many different color scales. And in the end, they highlighted, I think, Viridis, the scale you see on the lower right here, as one that led people to make particularly few errors and answer questions correctly quickly. And as a result of reading that paper, I used this color scale myself many times. And I have to tell you, every single time I ended up switching to something else, sometimes a color scale, a rainbow, after trying it. It just never quite clicked with me. And the truth is that, although it seems obvious these rainbows should mislead you, I can't actually remember any time I feel like I was misled or discovered I was misled. And meanwhile, they end up doing all sorts of good things, like the metaphorical aspect of hot versus cold or active versus passive makes it very easy to keep track of which direction is which. And also, honestly, they often look good all the time. So, next slide. So the interesting thing is there's not just an anecdotal case. There is a really interesting science here. Now, the funny thing is that as we were preparing this talk, someone published a wonderful article on Medium that describes the paper that I'd like to talk about. And I recommend this article highly. So please Google for When Life Gives You Rainbows, because in many ways it does a better job than I can do in a few minutes. But I want to talk about a particular paper in which they did some very, very interesting experiments that hint that rainbow color scales may not be that bad. Next slide. And so what Reda and Zafir did in 2020 is that they said, look, instead of testing low-level perceptual aspects of this scale, let's look at a broader statistical inference task where we're showing multiple distributions and trying to get people to figure out which distribution sticks out, essentially. So it's somewhat more representative, I would say, of the kind of data analysis one does in reality. And they found a bunch of interesting things. That they tested out many color scales. They actually had ways of defining how many nameable colors there were. And they actually found that helped. That what didn't seem to be a problem, but actually helped. And interestingly, we've seen this in other papers, hints of this as well. The very colorful ramps actually led people to do better at their task. And they didn't find any evidence of the illusions that people often assume are there. Very interesting. So next slide. Okay, so here are some lessons that I take from this. One is that if people keep doing things despite being scolded for it repeatedly, maybe those things are working, although maybe it's not at the task that you're studying. Another lesson is it's possible there's a little bit more of a decoupling between low-level perceptual cognitive science and the results we see in visualizations, and that's something to take seriously. I also want to have two really important caveats to this. So one is that, look, this is just one paper I'm talking about here, and this is a highly complex area with a very, very intricate literature, and it's very, extremely fascinating area, I would say. But I would argue this is an area that, as much as it's been studied, we should continue to study it even more. The other thing I will mention is this issue around accessibility is important, and even if we found the one perfect color scale for the right given task and for people with full color vision, it would still be important to research how we provide options or alternatives for people who are colorblind. Okay,
so I guess the last case study, if you will, is there's a lot in finding surprising. There's a lot to finding surprising good ideas. And I feel like in the way to getting there, sometimes, at least for Martin and myself, there's also a lot of exploration of bad ideas. And so don't be afraid of bad ideas. Just recognize they are bad when they're bad. And so we're going to tell a story of many ideas that we tried in one of our projects, and how they all failed, and how eventually we ended up on something that we were happy with. So this is going to take us to visualizing wind. And as I'm sure most of you know, wind visualization is something that has been around for many years, hundreds of years, if not thousands. And some of the wind visualizations tend to be very beautiful. More recently, with help from digital technology, a lot of the wind maps that you tend to see tend to be kind of like what I'm showing here, using vector fields, right? And this is all fine. But when Martin and I started thinking about this challenge of visualizing wind, we wanted to do something for the web. And because it was something for the web and we had access to live data, real-time data, we wanted something that was more dynamic. We wanted something that would feel more like the wind moving. And we didn't know how to get there. So we tried many things. So the very first thing we tried, and by the way, I'm about to show a number of tiny videos showing some of our bad ideas. And so, I don't know how the animation will go. Hopefully it won't be too bad. But just keep in mind, if the transmission is not great, usually these animations are supposed to be smooth. But here's the first idea we had. We kept thinking, what is wind, if not just particles moving around? And so we decided to do particles moving around. And this is what you're going to see here. So this is actual data of all the wind around the world, around the globe. And you can very quickly see that they look like a bunch of ants, but it's not telling us anything, right? So we're like, maybe we're not focusing on the right piece of this problem. Let's visualize the wind just in the US. And you can see the outline of the country, but still it's hard to understand what the wind is doing here. So we decided to move away from this idea of particles and try something very, very different. We decided to try something where we would use colors, lots of colors, and have a grid of colors that then we would let these colors move in the direction of the wind, so moving with the wind. And this is what that looks like. So you can see that we started with a grid of colors, and these colors are moving. They're kind of melting and kind of hurting your eyes.
That's kind of a psychedelic. You know, I went to Berkeley. I wore tie-dye T-shirts for a long time. It's a familiar look.
Exactly. But not one that would be super helpful to us in visualizing. So we decided to step away from the colors, and we decided, we started thinking, what if we, instead of trying to melt colors, we went back to something like brush strokes? Could we have black and white brush strokes that could show us the wind? And so this is kind of our attempt. It kind of looked like a zebra rug, but it started to look more interesting to us. We weren't there, and part of the reason why we knew we weren't there, even though, this felt closer, was that once this visualization stops, once the animation stops, you have no way of knowing the direction of the wind. Is it going north to south, south to north? We don't know. So at this point, we were very stuck, and we came close to sort of giving up on this problem of visualizing the wind. And then we decided, what if we went back to our very first unfortunate idea with the moving particles? And what if, instead of just moving the particles around, what if we made them leave trails as they moved? Would that be helpful? And so that's when we ended up with this version here. And when we saw this, we realized, okay, I think we got something here. This was not our final data visualization, but it was very close to what we ended up doing. So in fact, I'm gonna go now to hint and wind, and let's load the actual live wind map. So this is the final wind map, and it's public. Anyone can go there. It shows some of the latest forecasts for wind, and we can see right away, we can see some interesting patterns happening today. There's this very dramatic pattern on the right side of the US. And in fact, Martin and me, we are in Boston, so I'm going to start zooming in the Boston side. And you can see as I zoom in, we see a few more cities here. I can also see that the wind for us is kind of coming from the northeast. Anything that comes from the north at this time of the year makes me worried because it's much colder. And indeed, today is not a super warm day here. But check this out, this very dramatic kind of swirl happening on the east side of the US. On the other side, we have a lot of very fine kind of wave-like patterns. And a lot of this is because of the mountains out west. So one of the things we noticed right away as we started visualizing the wind was that it just changes. These shapes change a lot every day. And so we decided to create a little gallery just to show off some of just how different these patterns can be. So on a day like this one, it's as if Canada were stealing the air from the US, and not even the mountains on the west side prevent that from happening. You have other days like this one here, where I'm going to zoom in. And what's happening here is a hurricane. Hurricane Isaac is making landfall in New Orleans. And this was the first time since we had put up this visualization that a hurricane had made landfall in the US. And so as this was happening, we started getting emails from people affected by the hurricane. And so I remember someone sending us an email saying, I'm here in New Orleans, we're looking at your visualization, we are hoping and praying that this, passes and that everybody's okay. And it was really amazing and touching to get those emails real time as people were going through this. Later on, we ourselves went through something like this as Hurricane Sandy, came to the east coast of the U.S. and Boston was in the path of the hurricane. But now let me go back to the slides and just, I guess one thing that I wanted to say was that, we made a lot of choices here, a lot of data visualization and design choices on this particular piece. One of them was, as I'm sure you can see, the fact that we decided to not use color. And as you know from our previous projects we showed today, we are very capable of using lots and lots of colors in our data visualization work. But here, we didn't. We decided that we were more interested in the shape of the wind, and we didn't want anything to distract us from that. We wanted that shape and that pattern to be the focal point. You usually don't do that in data visualization, right? One of the most precious things you have in data visualization are all your dimensions, color being one of them. We decided to forego that. Another thing we did, we didn't fill the map with boundaries and state lines and all sorts of cities. We could, but we decided not to. Once again, because we wanted the focus to be the wind, for us, it was really amazing how the wind it doesn't matter if there is a boundary, if there is no boundary, the only boundaries that do matter are the mountains. And so we wanted that to speak, the terrain to speak for itself. And so we took away a lot of information from this map. We made it not utilitarian at all. It was a piece of expressive data visualization for us. Or was it? It turns out that even though we did not mean for this map to be utilitarian, it became utilitarian. So we got a number of emails from farmers telling us that they would look at the wind map before planning how to spray their crops. We got emails from scientists who would look at the wind map to look at bird migrations and butterfly migrations. We got emails from professors and teachers who would look at the map together with their students. And then we started getting emails from pilots, both commercial pilots and military pilots, saying that they were looking at the wind map, at which point we got very concerned because we make it very clear, or so we thought, on our website, that we are visualizing surface wind, which is from 0 to 12 meters. That's not the height at which you fly an airplane, right? So you do not want to look at these winds before flying an airplane. So we decided to put out a disclaimer on our website that said, please do not use the map or its data to fly a plane, sail a boat, or fight wildfires. Because we kept getting multiple emails for all of these use cases. And yet, even though we put that disclaimer there, we still got messages like this one that said, yeah, I appreciate your disclaimer, but please respect the power of this visualization in promoting the prevention of wildfires. So this was incredibly powerful to us. The fact that people were using this visualization. One of the main reasons why I think people use this visualization is because it's real time. I will also say that the technique itself, I think, was useful. It turns out that after we launched the wind map, news outlets around the world started to update the way they show wind forecast. And so today, when you look at the weather forecast, kind of across the globe, remember the wind map, because some of the techniques come from that experimental data visualization that we put up. So in conclusion, I think one of the things that we always want to do, that Martin and I are always interested in is to look for these happy surprises and keep updating our beliefs on what works, what doesn't work, what shouldn't work, but does, and what are the goals? Are we always designing for precision? Are we always designing for the right ink ratio? Do we have to? Are there other options? And if you get discouraged in any of that, remember the words we shared with you before from one of our users in one of our user studies, that some of what you're making in data visualization, make you think twice. They look like art. All of a sudden you're reading, thinking, feeling good, learning. So Martin, do you want to put
I think with that I'd say, I would just add, we're looking for students and postdocs for next year, and we'd love to open the floor to questions.
Thank you so much, Fernanda and Martin, for this very interesting talk. It was really amazing to learn from your fails and success. Really nice. And we have a couple of questions here, and we still have time to ask them. The first one is, the values that seem to help you in your designs were things like serendipity, exploration, recombination. But academic VIS often rewards values like rigor or efficiency that are less inspired as raw material for new designs. How do you fix these values mismatch as a field?
I have a few thoughts on that. So one thing I'll say is that in some of what we're talking about, I think rigor is actually exactly aligned with what we're saying. So for instance, I think the whole saga of whether rainbow color scales are good or bad, to me is just a very interesting scientific debate with, all the papers we mentioned being quite rigorous. And I think to me, that just fits perfectly either way. In terms of design, one analogy I would make is say that or a connection is that this is a sort of constant tension in technology management, that the traditional approach to technology is to make processes as precise as possible. Yet with design, what has been discovered over the past couple decades is you need processes that can repeatedly create accidents, which sounds like a contradiction. But I think the design world has been learning about ways to do that. And so this is what I think is important, is that as a community, we think about what processes will create happy accidents. And then as reviewing papers, we don't penalize papers for using those processes, but really evaluate the results on their own merits.
Okay. We have another question here. How do you deal with visualization failure? Either when things don't go as planned or the way your visualization and perceive was not anticipated by you prior to creation brainstorm?
So I think this is a great question, and I think what we tried to do a little bit with the wind map, with the story we shared about the wind map, was to kind of show what we do when we work with failure. And by the way, a lot of the projects that you saw, that at least the projects that come from us, had a lot of failure points before we ended up in a solution that we were happy with. So for instance, the chromogram that Martin was demoing, one of the things I think we should have said from the start is that mapping from color to the alphabet was an act of desperation. We had spent a whole summer trying to visualize that data set of what are the actions that editors take on Wikipedia. And we tried many different visualization techniques, and nothing was working. We could see some patterns, but there's no new structure that was being revealed to us. There was no point where we were asking ourselves new questions. And so we kept just trying and getting desperate. At one point, we decided, should we just map color to these things and just see? what it does, and neither one of us was thinking this would work, and it did. And so I think this is part of the message here, is that you keep exploring what is possible, and maybe even get a little bit outside of your zone of comfort and try something new that you think, is there any chance anything here can make sense? But then there is the other side of this, which is once you try something new, and once you try something maybe that you don't think should work, really take a step back, look at it, and decide, does it work or does it not work? For instance, with the wind map, we threw away everything we had done because nothing was working. So this is what the message here is: not try ideas and keep the bad ideas. It's like, try ideas. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Be the judge and be open-minded.
Thank you. There are many other questions here, but unfortunately we are running out of time. So I will ask people to thank you again for this very nice talk. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I'll have to share that again, sorry. Mac. All right, so this is the closing session. All right, so I'm Brian Summa, all right, and Gustavo and I are, why does it keep doing that? And Gustavo and I are now the outgoing chairs for VIS 2021. All right, so the closing is always a time for reflection. Therefore, I wanted to start the session by honoring friends and colleagues who passed away this year. Isabel Cruz, Martin Eisenberg, and Michelle Vestenberg. Please join me in a moment of silence in their honor. All right, thank you, everyone. All right, so I'd like to start off this closing session with talking a little bit about our attendance numbers this year. We had over 3,700 attendees. This was second only to last year and is more than 3 times the next highest in 2018. This attendee number includes over 2,500 first-timers. Interestingly, the greatest number of attendees have only attended VIS 1 or 2 times. This attendance number clearly shows the strength and resilience of our community, that we can keep growing in a pandemic. If you're an attendee that's only ever known a virtual VIS, I really welcome you, and please consider joining us when we meet in person next year in Oklahoma City. Our conference is truly international. As you can see, we pretty much span the globe. This week, we saw a peak of 1,500 unique connections, unique visitors on a stream. Okay, we had a peak of around 900 simultaneous connections, and this is greater than our peak in 2020, which was the Capstone. And as you can see, we pretty much had, pretty much the 2020 peak almost all week. So this conference couldn't have happened without the organizing committee. So I'm going to take some time to sort of thank them. And please join me in Discord in thanking all of the members of our organizing committee. As you can see, there are many people that sort of work together to make this conference possible. There are some people, though, I'd like to highlight in thanking. The first is the core committee. This includes myself and Gustavo, our program chairs, Gautam and Josh, who put together this very complicated schedule, among many other things. Our finance chairs, Loretta and Maria, who their sort of adept handling of the budget this year allowed us to have free registration for students, even in a year where we had to pay a penalty because we had to move to virtual. Our conference manager, Michelle Ocampo, who had an IEEE, who's helped at every aspect of the planning. Our VEC chair, Lisa, who is the guide to make us make decisions that are the best interest of the conference long term. Our archive chairs, Samuel, Hendrik, Carolina, and Kyle, who kept their communication channels open and sort of made archives and recorded everything that we did for future years. And finally, our incoming chairs, Tim, Sarah, Michael, David, Danielle, and Hendrik. We wish you success, and we're excited to see what you do in the upcoming years. It goes without saying we need to thank our tech chairs. So please, in Discord, thank our tech chairs. If you've been on Discord for more than a minute, you've seen how much effort that they've put into making sure that this conference ran without a hitch. So please thank them. I'd like to really highlight Misha's work. He designed the entire streaming infrastructure that we used all week, sort of the student volunteer switcher that ran the videos. Many of you may not know that in previous years, last year for instance, it took a small army of student volunteers in Utah running on hardware streaming the content via OBS. Misha pretty much designed, it sort of innovated a design where we didn't have to do that. So this year, all of our streaming or switching was run by student volunteers pretty much at home and didn't need this sort of local team. Okay, so thank you, Misha, for this work. This new sustainable approach, I think, really will support future years of virtual content for VIS. I'd like to also thank Amy Gooch, who designed our GatherTown space, a really fun and useful space. So thank you. Gave everyone a really a nice taste of New Orleans. I'd like to thank the web chairs, whose work made this a truly seamless virtual experience. So thank you, Alper, Yugoda, Dylan, and Steve. I'd like to also thank our student volunteer chairs, Bon, Juan, Nicole, and Beatrice, for all of their efforts this week, which there were substantial efforts. And finally, I'd like to thank the true heroes of VIS, our student volunteers. This international group ran practically everything in the conference, so please join me in thanking them in Discord. We really could not have done this conference without them. And I'd like to point out that the help house that was in Discord, GatherTown, was actually the design for the student volunteer t-shirt by Alex Burns. So now I'd like to hand over the presentation, the opening presentation, to the VEC for a few words.
Hello, I'm Holger Teisel. I'm one of the incoming co-chairs of the VIS Executive Committee. We are almost at the end of the conference, and I'm sure that our general chairs, Brian and Gustavo, already thanked the organizing committee and many more people for the work and passion to make this virtual VIS conference a success. I would like to use the opportunity to thank Brian and Gustavo themselves for all their work as general chairs. Thanks and congratulations to you. I can hear a huge applause from the thousands of happy VIS 2021 participants. As you might remember from the opening session, our VIS conference is a rather complex thing in terms of structure and organization. For each VIS conference in every year, we have general chairs and an organizing committee. In addition, there are two governing bodies of the VIS that are responsible for all long-term issues of the conference, the VIS Steering Committee and the VEC, the VIS Executive Committee. Here you can see the current members of the Steering Committee and the VEC. The VEC had recently elected new chairs, and the new VEC co-chairs, essentially from today on, are Ross Maciejewski and myself, Holger Teisel. The two committees want to give some special appreciation to a few people now. This year, we had for the first time the new area model, and we had for the first time overall paper chairs. Bongxin Li, Sylvia Miksch, and Anders Innermann. Overall paper chairs have ultimate responsibility for the content of the conference and have to manage the submission and review timeline and communication. It is considerably to their credit that VIS is a great success in both the technical excellence of the presentation and treating VIS as shared community and not just a set of isolated areas. Their patience, wisdom, and commitment to the excellence of the VIS conference are truly remarkable and worthy of special recognition and appreciation from everyone who is part of VIS. Because of this, Bongshin, Sylvia and Anders receive a certificate of appreciation from the VIS conference. We did not inform them in advance about this, so we hope that Bongshin, Sylvia and Anders are a little bit but positively surprised in this moment. Congratulations and thanks to you. At the VEC, we have an outgoing chair, Lisa Avila, and an outgoing vice chair, Jason Dykes. Lisa was VEC chair since 2018, Jason was on the VEC since 2017. And in this time they really shaped our conference. The last 4 years were a rather challenging time for the VIS conference. We had to bring the restructuring to an end, and we had to struggle with the impact of the pandemic. Lisa and Jason managed to push all necessary changes forward, and at the same time they stayed cool, organized and kept overview. You have a big share that the VIS conference went through the last years pretty successfully. And we also have certificates of appreciation for you as a little and hopefully positive surprise. Thank you for all your work. I'm already missing you in the VEC. Let's have a look at the next VIS conferences. Next year we are in Oklahoma City. VIS 23 will be in Melbourne, and we are about to finish the setup for VIS 24 and announce locations and general chairs very soon. For 2025, everything is open. So you may think about hosting VIS 25 and send a bid in February. All details about the bidding process are on the VIS web page. My last message to all of you is please volunteer. We are a community of volunteers. All the work to drive our conference is done by volunteers who do this work in addition to their actual work. There are different ways to volunteer. You may volunteer for the organizing committee or the program committee. For both, we will bring out forms to the webpage. You may elect or even get elected for the steering committee or the VEC. Information about this is also on the webpage. And you may consider becoming a general chair for a future VIS conference. Keep in mind, VIS only works if we devote some time and energy in serving the community. Thank you very much.
I'm back. Sorry. All right. So even though, VIS 2021 is now over, our visualization work continues. So to close out the conference, we'll hear from chairs of upcoming conferences, Pacific VIS and EuroVIS. And then finally, we'll hear from the new general chairs from VIS 2022. But before we leave, I just wanted to take this time, we wanted to take this time to thank everyone for attending and bid you all a fond farewell. We'll see you in Oklahoma City.
My name is Kazuo Misue. I'm a professor at the University of Tsukuba, Japan. I have been appointed the conference chair of Pacific VIS 2022. Next Pacific VIS is the 15th time. The date is scheduled for April 11 to 14, 2022. The venue is Tsukuba Science City in Japan, or virtual online depending on the situation of COVID-19. We have prepared some paper categories: full papers, visualization notes, so-called short papers, and posters. Moreover, visual data storytelling contest and workshop Visualization Meets AI. The deadline of full papers has already passed, but you have time for the other categories. You can see the call for papers in the web page. Tsukuba City is an academic city with many research institutes in addition to the University of Tsukuba. It is about 50 kilometers from Tokyo. By using Tsukuba Express, an express railway, it is possible to come from Tokyo in 45 minutes. By the way, The terminal on the Tokyo side of Tsukuba Express is Akihabara. Akihabara is famous as an electric town, but some of you may know it as a town of anime, comics, and maid cafes. I'm looking forward to seeing you in Tsukuba. I hope you enjoy Pacific VIS, Tsukuba City, and Japan. Thank you.
Good morning to everybody. This is Giuseppe Santucci speaking, and I am really proud to announce the EuroVis 2022 in Rome. I will quickly go through the how, the when, the who, and the where. Let's start with the how. The decision has been taken. EuroVis will be an old-fashioned in-presence conference. Of course, we were ready to switch to remote if needed. We were ready to handle exceptions, and the website will provide more details about the story. What about the when? 13-17 June in Rome. And please note that the week before, AVI 2022 will take place in Frascati, that is very close to Rome. This is to me a very interesting synergy. And what about the VU, the conference chairs? Me, Tiziana Catarci, and Marco Scherf, all from University of Rome. Basically, the old people taking the credit. And what about the WER group? Young people doing the real stuff. Marco Angelini, Simone Lenti, Graziano Basilli, Alessia Paleschi, and Miao Direto. The WER group is a very active research group about visualization and user analytics, doing research on both theoretical and practical aspects of the visualization. And let's move to the WER. Pontifical University Thomas Aquinas, Angelicum in the following. It is a very old place in Rome, in the middle of Rome, and it is old-fashioned. It is perfect to host an old-fashioned in-presence conference. Here are some pictures of places in walking distance from the site. And again, still stay on the where. What about the social event? It is still a mystery. There are some still actual rules about COVID that limit the attendee presences. And we are investigating for larger venues, basically. You know the story later on. And I have a short message from the full paper chairs. The full paper will use a formal rebuttal system. And they are open to non-traditional paper types. And all accepted papers are published in the Computer Graphic Forum. And the deadline are very, very close. The abstract November 24 and the submission December 2. And spoiler alert, keynote capstone have been set. Moritz Steffener and Angela Morelli. And remember, Rome is full of additional scientific facilities. So I think that you have no more excuse. Come in Rome for EuroVis 2022, eventually a VIS conference. And stay tuned on our website. Bye to all.
Welcome to Hybrid IEEE VIS 2022, which will be held in Oklahoma City from October 15th to October 22nd. We hope that the COVID pandemic is under control next year, and we are looking forward to make 2022's edition of VIS the one where it's again about the people that you meet. 3 of these people you will most likely find in Oklahoma City in the in-person venue, and these are the general chairs. Daniel Safir from UNC Chapel Hill, David Ebert from the University of Oklahoma, and me, Hendrik Strobelt, from MIT IBM in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Good afternoon and good evening. I'm David Ebert, and it's my pleasure to encourage you to join us next October here in Oklahoma City for VIS 22. Meet all your VIS friends and colleagues and see the latest innovations in our field. Oklahoma City is centrally located, has easy air connections to get you here, and has a lot to offer in terms of activities, whether you're interested in cultural activities, you're interested in seeing historic exhibitions, or partaking in beautiful weather and outdoor activities. October is a perfect time of year to be here with very comfortable temperatures, normally blue skies, And the great thing about VIS 22 is it's located in the central part of downtown Oklahoma City with a lot of activities within walking distance from museums to restaurants. And you'll also be able to see the brand new Omni Hotel where the conference will take place. It's a beautiful space with beautiful Scissortail Park right in front of it. And you'll have a wonderful time here in Oklahoma City next October.
We are excited to welcome you back in person to VIS 2022, where we will be hosting a hybrid event with both virtual and in-person components. Our goal with the hybrid design is to combine the benefits of in-person conferences with the opportunities for inclusion and participation that virtual conferences have enabled. There are a lot of decisions to be made in terms of how this hybrid model will work, how it will be implemented, and how it will be executed. We know, for example, that all of the main paper sessions will be available virtually and broadcasted live, but there are still a lot of decisions to be made. In part, this is because VIS isn't just the main paper sessions. It consists of many events that offer opportunities for interchange and collaboration, including keynotes, opening and closing statements, panels, fantastic programs like our workshops at VIS in Practice and the VIS Arts program, posters, conversations with supporters, various opportunities for networking, including parties and meetups. There's all sorts of opportunities that we want to be able to include as part of the hybrid experience. And so any thoughts or ideas that you have as to how we can optimize for your hybrid experience, we would love to hear. And if you want your voice to be heard even more, we are still looking for people to help contribute and be part of the growth of VIS, especially as we move into this new age for the conference. We could explicitly use help with folks interested in engaging in fast forwards, publicity, interfacing with supporters, and helping us with tech and web, which will be a critical component of the hybrid experience. If you're interested in getting involved, please reach out to vec@ieeevis.org.
And with this, we are closing the 21 VIS conference. Thank you, Brian, and the whole organization team that helped making it happen. For you as attendees, have safe travels from your office room to your living room or to your bedroom. And we hope to see you in a year from now in Oklahoma City. Until then, enjoy the year.